Hey guys, welcome. This is Kristen Comstock with the Now What podcast, and we are here to talk about some of the hard topics that we come across in life and as women. So we talk about things like adoption, abortion, miscarriages, all of the hard topics that are not often talked about. And so I am here with my dear friend and my sister in Christ. We're actually we have the same spiritual mama. So I'm here with Amanda Joplin, and you are a wife. And how long have you and your husband been married?
We just celebrated our 10th anniversary.
Okay, that's a big one.
Yes.
And you have two boys.
We do.
And how old are they? And their names?
Matson is 8 and Wesson is 4.
Okay. And so tell me just a little bit more. So you are adopted.
I am.
And you are an adoptive
mom. Yes.
Okay.
An adoptee and an adoptive mama.
Okay, good. And you're also a heart failure survivor.
I am.
So, and we'll get into that a little bit more as you share a little bit more about your story. Mm-hmm. And you're really just a great friend, I will say, and fun to be around. Well, and you're busy with your boys because they're in their younger years. So they're not obviously both in school yet.
Right.
So before we get started, I just because we've known each other, and I have to tell just a funny story about Matson because her boys definitely have their own little personalities. And before we knew each other really well, one of the ways that we kind of began to interact with each other, one was through church, but also I was helping you guys sell one of your homes that you had. Mm-hmm. And it was the first time I had come over to your home, and I was just looking around, and, I was just looking and making sure everything looked good, and let's see what you guys may need to do or may not need to do. And I just happened to open a cabinet, and there was a kid in the cabinet. And I was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting to see a kid there. And then looking around to see what else was with that child. He had binoculars and fake money and real money and a camera and a walkie-talkie. And I'm like, Amanda, what kind of operation are you letting your boys run? So they're really fun.
They are really fun.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you because I just think it's so needed, and we don't always hear everyone's full story, right? A lot of times we hear the redemption in your story. We hear the end piece, the piece that everyone is so excited to hear about, but also no one usually, unless it's your close friends and family, they don't hear all of the work and the battling spiritually and physically and mentally and emotionally that we go through to get on the other side of our trial that we're going through in life. And so for you, what we're going to talk about today is going to be adoption. Mm-hmm. And so before we get into that conversation, I'm just going to give some statistics about adoption. And one is about 135,000 children are adopted in the United States each year. Mm-hmm. So does that sound like a low number to you? Because it seems a little low to me, just based on how many kids are in foster care and stuff like that.
Right. Well, you think of how many kids are born each day. So comparatively, it feels low.
Yeah. And then so there are no national statistics out there really for how many people are waiting to adopt, but they estimate that in between 1 and 2 million couples are waiting to adopt children. Mm-hmm. And so I find that interesting. And then another one that I find interesting is that no more than 2% of Americans have actually adopted, which also seems kind of low to me. Mm-hmm. And then also 6 in 10 Americans have had personal experience with adoption, meaning they themselves, a family member, or a close friend was adopted or had a child through adoption. Mm-hmm. So I found that interesting as well. So just some fun statistics to kind of know a little bit more about the topic if you don't know about it.
Right.
So before I ask you a ton of questions, can you tell me just a little bit about your now what moment in related to your adoption story?
So we had what we're going to go into more detail on. We had a failed adoption. And for us, we had prayed and we really felt like we were called to adoption and that was what we were supposed to do. And we had been obedient and followed Christ's lead on that. And then this now what moment of we were kind of left holding the bag of disappointment and heartache and not understanding why.
Right.
But the Lord, he had so much more for us. And we didn't realize that
at the time.
Right. We didn't know if the failed adoption meant that season or that specific calling was no or closed, or if it was wait.
Right. So on that, why was adopting so important to you and Matt? Because, I mean, I know you were adopted, so that has a special place in your heart, but what was the reason why you guys even wanted to pursue that route?
So, like you said, I am adopted, and adoption has always just been part of my life. You know, I can't remember not knowing. Our parents shared that very young. I have a twin brother who was also adopted. So we were adopted together.
Which is so cool.
Yes. So we were adopted together. And so it was always such a precious part of our life. And I had such a positive adoption story that I knew from a very young age that I also wanted to adopt. And so when I first started dating my husband, Matt, he did not come from a family of adoption, didn't have friends who had adopted, didn't really know a whole lot about it.
Right.
But I told him, and he reminded me today that I told him on our first date that adoption was something that was important to me.
So you made that very clear up front, like whether we have children naturally or not, for sure, this is important. I want to adopt a child.
Yes. And I didn't want to pursue a relationship with somebody whose heart wasn't also for adoption because it was so important to me. It needed to be important to them as well.
Right. So, and then because you were adopted, did your parents keep that a secret from you? Were they open with it?
They were very open. Like I said, I can't remember the exact age that they told us, but it was very young because I just always remember knowing that I was adopted.
Right. So going into your marriage, you knew that you were going to adopt at some point. Obviously, you didn't necessarily have like a clear plan that year or whatever. We're going to start the process, or right when we're married, we're going to start the process. So you have your oldest, Matson, naturally. You get pregnant naturally. You have Matson. Tell me a little bit more about that experience, which ultimately led you guys to adoption.
Well, we had decided early on that we knew we wanted to adopt, but we also knew we wanted to have biological children as well. And we didn't have the order planned out. We had really just trusted that the Lord would allow the order to work out the way that it was supposed to. Right. So we had decided if we adopt first, if that works out, that's what we'll do. If we get pregnant biologically first, we'll do that. So we did. We got pregnant with Matson pretty quickly after we got married. And pregnancy was great. No complications or issues until I had him. And shortly after delivery, I went into heart failure. And namely postpartum cardiomyopathy. So basically my chest filled with fluid and my heart was struggling to continue to beat and do what it was supposed to do because I was basically drowning from the inside out. So
Which is scary.
It was
when
scary.
You say after, like, are we talking hours? Are we
a
talking
couple of days? I started not feeling well shortly after I had him, but I just assumed those were just normal things that you experience after having a baby because I had no issues or complications prior to that. And so it continued to get worse and worse, and they released me and I went home, and all of a sudden it hit.
Right.
I woke up and I couldn't breathe. I heard like a gurgling in my chest and I knew I was in trouble. So my family called 911, and that's when I was admitted to the hospital and found out that I was in heart failure.
Okay.
So yeah, scary.
So obviously in the moment that's really scary.
Right.
But staying on topic with obviously having children and everything, you went through what you needed to go through to kind of understand what was going on with your body and obviously take care of your body the way it needed to be taken care of so that you survived.
Right.
But how did the initial response to the heart failure, and I'm assuming doctors told you like, hey, you shouldn't have any more children biologically. So how did that initial news hit you as far as wanting to have kids and wanting to have more kids?
Well, I was told immediately when I was in the hospital that if I were to ever get pregnant again, it would take my life. And so the initial shock of that was a lot. It was overwhelming. And it took some time to process that, that door had been closed for us. Biologic, that had been closed.
That was just a door that was shut.
That was a door that was shut. But in the same breath of that, we also knew we were called to adoption. And so that kind of concreted God's plan for us. We knew, okay, next we're supposed to adopt. And adoption was never a plan B for us.
Right.
It was always part of our plan that we would, the Lord willing, be able to adopt a child or more. And so at that moment, processing both sides, like we knew, okay, this is heartbreaking that we can't have any more biological children, but this is obviously the Lord's will.
Right. So this was quite literally for you, like God shut one door and
he
opened
literally,
another.
Yes, he literally shut the door.
Right. So, okay. So you have your firstborn.
Yes.
Matson.
Uh-huh.
And now you move into, I say we, like I'm there. I was there with you.
Right.
You move into, okay, we knew that this was part of our plan to adopt. So you kind of, you and Matt move into this mode of beginning to actually explore the adoption process.
Right.
So let's talk about the first adoption. And I really want to be a little intrusive just because I think it's common questions out there,
Right.
I think, and this is just my personal opinion, there's no like science to back this up or anything, but I could imagine one of the reasons why there's not more adoptions is that it's kind of this topic that you're like, I think it's expensive. I don't really know.
Right.
And like, I also don't know very much about it. And the process is complicated.
Right.
And so I think it's just not necessarily explored
Right.
As much as maybe it should be. So just to be a little intrusive,
Sure.
How much does an adoption cost? I mean, obviously costs change. We see that all the time.
Right.
But what does it tend to cost? Like
for a private domestic adoption in the U.S. costs anywhere between $30,000 and $40,000.
And you have to put a lot of that up front, right? So
most agencies will require a good chunk of that up front in order to start the process.
Which could be very difficult for many families.
For most families.
Especially a family that maybe they can't have children, that they want to start a family, but they don't have the capital. They don't literally have the capital.
Right.
To do that, which they can, of course, explore other options. But just to kind of be a little intrusive.
That's okay. It's one of those questions everybody wants to know.
Yeah, they want to know, and no
exactly.
Most people won't ask like on the spot. So.
Right.
Okay, so let's explore this first adoption. Mm-hmm. So we're talking around 2016?
Yes.
Okay, so walk me through that. Like you got selected by a birth mom. Kind of tell me a little bit about what time frame that looked like, and just walk me through the steps on that.
So when Matson was 2, we felt like that was the right time to go ahead and start the adoption process. So we had some friends who were in the adoption business, as far as he was a lawyer and an agency and whatnot. So we knew that that's who we wanted to go through for our adoption. They had adopted children as well, and so they understood the process from all sides as well. And
personally,
that was important
professionally,
to us.
Legally.
Right, that it wasn't just somebody doing it for a paycheck. It was somebody who actually supported and loved adoption.
Okay.
And so we started the process when he was 2, which involves a lot of background checks, fingerprints, a home study where they come into your home and check to make sure that it is a safe place to bring a child home to. Mental health checks. There's a lot. Physicals. There's a lot.
And it takes a long time.
It is not
it is
not an overnight process.
Right.
Because they want to make sure that children that are adopted are going into homes where they will be loved and cared for. So we started that entire process, and we were matched with a birth mom fairly quickly. So what you do is most private agencies, you'll create like a book about yourself with some pictures, a little bit of information. And then they give those books to birth moms to look through, and they're able to select what family that they think they would like to raise their child. So they have a say in that.
Right.
And so we were selected fairly quickly by a birth mom. She was very early in her pregnancy, so we walked the entire pregnancy out with her. We got those first ultrasound pictures and all of that.
And did you meet her?
We did meet her. Yep.
Okay.
We sat down and had lunch with her because we wanted her to know our heart also.
Right.
And just to kind of know a little bit about us.
Right.
Wanted her to trust us.
And feel confident in her decision.
Right. Feel confident in her decision.
So you walk through like 7 months of pregnancy with this woman. And you did all the things, right? Like you guys had a baby shower, you set up the nursery, you decorated the nursery, you had a car seat ready.
Right.
You have been praying for this woman this whole pregnancy and for this child that's going to be your child. You planned for her, you loved her through the process.
Right.
And then what? And
then all of a sudden, we got a knock at the door. It was our adoption attorney coming to let us know that some things had happened and that he wasn't really sure what was going to happen going forward as far as the adoption that we were pursuing. We knew that the birth mom should have had the baby by that point, but all of a sudden we weren't getting updates. We weren't hearing anything. So we were concerned for her well-being, but also, of course, longing for this baby that we were so ready to bring home and love and care for. So we got the knock, and it became apparent pretty quickly that things were going south.
Mm-hmm. Did you have this moment that you remember that like just fear kind of crept in where you're like, this may not just be a hiccup?
Right. When he showed up at the door, I knew, because we had been anticipating the call that the baby was born.
Y'all are like on standby at this point.
We were
like, no
on
family vacation.
Yes.
You're basically waiting.
Right. Yeah. Keeping phone on at all times, just in case we got the call in the middle of the night, ready to go. Diaper bag packed in the car seat in the car, ready to go. And when I saw his face at the door, I just knew. It was that like gut, sense that something was not good.
And so you found out that, and what ended up happening is you ended up finding out that the birth mom actually had the baby a few weeks earlier, right?
Weeks earlier.
Which is shocking in itself.
Right, because we thought she was still pregnant.
Right.
At that point.
So tell me what happened. So you find out she has the baby already a few weeks before, which is a long time.
Right.
So, and that's, again, another indication that this is really not great news.
Right.
So how did you end up finding out like that this was something that was going to really become kind of a nightmare for you guys?
It did. It was the beginning of a nightmare. So when you start the adoption process, you know that a birth mom could change her mind. That is just something you go in knowing that the birth mom has that right to do that. Until they've signed paperwork, they can change their mind and decide to keep their baby instead. And so that is something that it's something that you pray doesn't happen to you, but you know that it can.
Right.
But this situation was unique in that we knew that the birth mom wasn't, just because of circumstances, she wasn't going to be allowed to keep her child. Mm-hmm. So she had ultimately chosen to place her child for adoption as opposed to her child going into foster care when they were born. What we ended up finding out is that she had the child and the child had gone into foster care. She didn't let them know at the hospital that she had an adoption plan in place, that she had an attorney or a family who was ready waiting. So instead, she left the baby, which
is heart-wrenching. Like, I just want to say that just that information alone is just absolutely heart-wrenching to know. You've been waiting for this child this whole time.
Right.
And she's born.
Right.
And now she's in the system.
Right. Right. And, when a birth mom changes her mind, you think that's got to be for the best. It's always best for a child to stay with their birth parent. That is always ideal situation.
And that's really what God has intended.
That is what God has intended.
You're the mom. You've carried this child in your body for however many months you are pregnant.
Right.
And God's really intention is for the child to have a whole family.
Exactly.
Biologically.
Right. But the fact that this child didn't go with birth mom and ultimately ended up in the system and didn't have somebody to bond with, it was heartbreaking. And we really did want her. But because of the way that the system works and how things are, we didn't have access to her inside the foster care system.
And so let's talk about that, because essentially you're her mom. I mean,
Right.
that's how I view it. And I know I'm your friend and like I'm for you and everything
Right.
like that. But when you look at the process as a whole, you've walked through 7 months of pregnancy with this
Right.
woman. You've prayed over the child. You've prayed over the birth mother. You've seen the ultrasounds. You've decorated the nursery. It's all pretty and pink,
Right.
and your heart is for this child that you've prayed for that's going to be your baby.
Right.
How do you navigate that?
Well, because it's like you feel like it's everything a mom would do.
Like you should be looking like, don't you feel like I should be doing everything I can to find my child and make sure
Right.
my child's safe? I mean,
safe.
it has to be how it feels.
And that was we both just worried. Is she okay? Is she in a home that's taking care of her and
She's safe
and not abusing her? And that was our biggest worry. And that's what parents do. They worry about their children. They want to know that they're okay and they're safe and they're cared for. And normally we're the ones who do that. We can ensure they're safe because they're with us.
Right.
We can ensure they're
Right.
fed because
Right.
we're doing it. And so not knowing if somebody was meeting those needs for her was very hard for us.
I honestly, I can't imagine. I really can't, like, every time, and I know we've discussed it on occasions, but every time I hear you speak about it, I can't imagine having to not look for her.
Right.
I mean, and I know that there's legalities
Right,
to it too,
exactly.
right? Like to an extent, like
Yeah.
it's like, and this isn't your child, even though it is your child, it's not
Right.
your child.
Right.
So that's hard.
By legal standards.
By legal
she wasn't
standards.
in our
But
heart.
in your heart, she
Right.
really is still your child.
Right.
So all of this happened, and
Mhm.
it's called a failed adoption,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's essentially
That's the
what
actual term that's used. Right.
right. At what point did you have to stop waiting for her? Because I think for a period of time, you guys are like, maybe we can work this out,
Right.
like legally. Obviously, she's in the system, but there's a family that has been waiting for her, that's prepared for her.
Right.
But at what point did you have to stop?
Right. So for a couple of months, we did fight. We made phone calls. We did everything that we could do to try to talk to birth mom and see what we could do to work with her in order to bring this baby home to a safe home that they'd be loved.
And didn't you meet back up with her?
We did meet back up with the birth mom, and she went back and forth. It ultimately became a game of
Right.
with our emotions.
Right. And there was, I'm sure, some other circumstances that impacted the
There were.
decisions being made. But
Right. She wasn't in a healthy place
right.
to make sound decisions. And, looking back, we can see that. But in the moment, when
your heart
emotions
is
are
whatever I have to
involved-
do to make sure my child is safe and with me
Right.
is what I'm going to do.
Right. So we did that for a little while, and we would get hope and think, okay, this is going to work out. We're going to be able to pick her up. She's going to be ours. And then something would happen to crush that. And it was like this cycle of over and over. And it did. It started to affect us personally. It affected our marriage. It affected our parenting, because we were really grieving a child. And it is so strange to grieve somebody who's still alive.
They didn't pass away.
Right.
They're
Right.
still here on earth.
Right. They're still physically alive, but we grieved her not being with us. It was grieving somebody who's alive, but that we don't have access to, and we don't know if they're okay. And that's a very weird
I
to
can
walk
only
through.
imagine.
Just the not knowing and the going back and forth of, okay, maybe this is going to work out. No, and it's not going to work out. Maybe it is. And so we really, we just really started praying, Lord, what are we supposed to do in this? And the Lord so clearly told me one day, just stop fighting, stop doing whatever it is that you think you can do in your own strength to fix this situation. And I called my husband at work, and the Lord gave him that at the same time. That he actually had to leave work and go sit in his car because it was so clear to him at the same exact time that we were both we were supposed to stop everything that we were doing, all of the fighting, not with each other, but fighting within ourselves, feeling like we could fix this
Right.
situation ourselves.
Because you're trying to protect a child that
Right.
you don't have access to.
Exactly. And the Lord gave me the verse, Exodus 14:14, the Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. And it was like, okay, my only job right now is to just be still and trust the Lord. And we've both been Christ followers for a long time. So that seems like that should be simple, but it's not. It's not when it's something so important to you.
Yeah.
And so precious to you. But we did. And the Lord gave us peace in that.
And so, and I'm going to ask you an even hard,
okay.
I think this is a hard question.
Go for it.
So why do you think, and now we know the ending, which we'll talk about, but why in that moment, why did you think that God allowed, what was your thought process behind, gosh, did God allow this failed adoption, or what's your plan? Like, what was your initial thought process? Like, he told you to stop.
Right.
But you're like, now what?
Now what? Right. And that's
now what?
Right. Now what? Exactly. And that's where we were with that was, okay, so do we stop and it means we're just done, that this door has also closed, the biological door has closed and now the adoption door has closed. And I wrestled with that.
Right.
Like, Lord, you've closed the door on us being able to have any more children biologically.
Right.
Now we're closing this adoption door. And my desire is to have more children.
Right.
Or are you just saying, wait?
Right.
And we had to ultimately just trust, because the desires of our heart were still to adopt.
Right.
So we had to just trust that even though we really struggled with the why.
And God put that desire in your heart.
Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we had to just ultimately trust through tears. There was a lot of tears.
Yes.
Of that he had a different plan for us.
So talk to me a little bit more about how the failed adoption impacted your marriage, because you did mention that it did have an impact on your marriage,
right?
And that your grieving process is different, and this really does apply to. I mean, God created us man and woman.
Right.
We are very different creatures,
Right.
and we process things differently. And this can be applied to, having a miscarriage, or, going through the grieving of making the decision to abort a child, and then later, essentially regretting that decision.
Right.
And either way, whether you aborted a child or not, it's still, you potentially
There's
are
grief.
grief there. So talk to me about how you grieve differently, and then also how it impacted your marriage.
Well, we naturally, my husband and I we have very different personalities.
Yes, you do.
Very different personalities. My husband's military, and he's very military as far as his reactions and personality. And I am feelings, all feelings. Sorry.
Siri doesn't understand
Siri
our
does
feelings.
not understand that. But so we did grieve. We went through, because there's all the processes of grief. And we went through them at different times.
Right.
And that was hard, because you feel like, well, they should be grieving how I'm grieving. And so that did.
Are you even sad, or like, do you feel like you've lost a child? Because I feel like I have lost a child. You know?
Exactly. And my husband is more just facts, like, well, okay, so what can we do to fix this? And I'm more, I've got to process all of the feelings.
Right.
Ultimately, and this is just in the Lord's goodness, is when it came down to it, we were aligned with.
We were on the same page when it really came down to. Right.
We handled some of the grief portions of it differently. He was more prone to anger, and I was more prone to shutting down and, sadness and all of those things. But the Lord allowed us to walk through that together, because we needed to grieve that loss together.
Now, again, I'm just probing here, because this is really not talked about. We don't talk about the hardship of it. We see the adoption. What do you call adoption day? The gotcha day.
The gotcha day. Right.
We see those. Like, we see those posts on social media and everything like that.
Right.
So I really want to dive into a little bit more before we wrap up, is what it physically looked like, right? Because there is a reality that sets in where you've prepared for this child, and I can only imagine, having a nursery set up for this specific daughter.
Right.
And it may have been set up differently for a different daughter. It's not even a girl or a boy thing. Specifically, you prayed for this daughter.
Right.
And you set up her room for this child.
Right.
You had a car seat. You have all these physical aspects of preparing for a child that you're going to have. What does it look like when all your friends and family are gone, and it's just you and your husband, and your child that you have, your biological child that you have, what does it look like when you're left with
right? Like I said earlier, holding the bag. Yeah.
Yes.
Holding the bag of all of this disappointment. And, in typical Southern woman fashion, I had the name that we had chosen for her monogrammed on the wall, and we had the swings and the bouncy seats and all of those things out in our living room.
And a glitter was the wall.
The glitter. Yes. Glitter paint on the walls and all of that set up ready for a baby to come home. And so that was a hard realization once the Lord had told us stop. And once we really came to terms with that, we weren't bringing her home, that I still had all this stuff I had to look at. And I'm a stay-at-home mom, so I couldn't escape from seeing all of those things. Right. So we eventually just picked it all up, put it in the room, and closed the door. And I remember so vividly laying on the floor in there and just crying.
I mean, what else are you going to do?
Right. There was no baby in that room, and so there was nothing else I could do except lay on that floor and cry and grieve.
Yeah.
So,
I'm processing what you're saying because it's such a reality of more families than we probably, I know a lot of families that have adopted. I don't know but you that have had a failed adoption, but I know you're not the only one out there.
Right.
And it's such a harsh reality of losing that child. So what did the responsibility become to your daughter? And I'm calling her your daughter. Yes, she's not legally your daughter.
Right.
She was and is your daughter.
Right.
And so what did the responsibility come to her, and how did you determine once she wasn't going to legally be your daughter,
right,
how you were responsible to her as a mother?
Right. And you feel like as a mother, you have there's some responsibility somewhere. I couldn't bring her home and meet her physical needs. I couldn't care for her emotional needs or her spiritual needs, but I knew that the Lord had called me to be her prayer covering. And there was such peace when I realized my only responsibility to that baby was not to raise her, not to feed her, not to meet her needs, but to be her prayer covering, that she may have nobody else in the world who's praying for her. So that was my job.
And I know your prayers are powerful. So,
Thank you.
So there's a woman out there.
Right.
Or she's still a girl. But there is a child out there that will grow into a woman that will get married at some point, hopefully, and is happy and has children of her own, that will always have your prayer covering. And I love that because I know that you're going to stick to that and that you're true to that.
Right.
And I think that's so beautiful because there are power in our prayers.
Right. Absolutely.
And we don't know, and we've talked about this. I am so excited. I mean, it's not really any of my business, but I'm still going to ask the Lord because I think it would be so cool. But I'm so excited to see I'd love to see like a replay when you get to heaven and you get to see what your prayers were as you were praying and how it impacted her life.
Right.
And I just think that would be such a cool vision and thing to see when we get to talk to the Lord and really ask him. And I don't know, maybe he'll show you that before. So
yeah.
So I want to end with a little bit of encouragement because this is a hard topic, and we are gonna continue our conversation about adoption and where you guys are at now. But as we end for this episode, I would love for you to be able to give some words of encouragement.
Sure.
So what would be words of encouragement that you could speak into birth mothers that are either choosing to or already have placed their children up for adoption or placed their children with their adoptive parents?
Sure. I just, it's not lost on me that my greatest joy in adoption is the greatest heartache of a birth mother out there. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important just to recognize the magnitude of the decision that birth moms make and the selflessness of their choice in choosing life for their child, first and foremost, when abortion is an option. So choosing life is already a hard decision for somebody who's not able or has chosen not to parent the child that they're carrying. And I've birthed a child, and I know how hard it is. I know how hard it is to carry a baby and how hard it is to go through the birthing process, but then to place that baby with somebody else. I just think that you're brave and you matter, and you have great value. That I am so grateful for my birth mother, so grateful for her decision, because I know it was hard. And I think recognizing that your decision was hard, but you made the right one is important. And I'm so thankful for my son's birth mother, because again, you endured the hard to do ultimately what's best for your child. And that you love them enough to care for their future.
Yeah.
You know, that
you carry them and care for their future to make that decision.
That you can think past just the here and now. And so I just think that birth moms are just amazing women.
I love that. So stick with us, because next time we're going to continue the story. So we'll see you soon. See you soon.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Now What with Kristen Comstock. Be sure to turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode. See you next time.